You need to understand how this connects to the business goals. Rapid fire app critique. I'm going to pretend I'm a really, really bad PM. Painkiller and something called a vitamin. I would focus almost entirely. You can also look at a company's, when people ask you a question, those are all different ways to make impact.
How do you identify problems that the product is solving? How do you know that the one that you're talking about is the most prominent or actually the right one?
This is a great question. So first, you need to identify who the end user is, like the primary user, because a lot of apps have like secondary and tertiary users, right? You need to understand what that user's problem is. And for the problem, there's two kind of classifications in product space. There's something called a painkiller and something called a vitamin. The vitamin means like it's like not like a critical problem. It's like a nice to have solution.
Okay.
But a painkiller is like this is a very critical problem, and like the user would pay any amount of money or like go out of their way to get that solution. So ideally, you define primary end user and you identify their painkiller problem. And then that usually gives you a lot of insight and steers you in the right direction on what the problem is solving. In your YouTube example, right? I don't even see YouTube as one product. It's really like a collection of products, right? Because there's YouTube for consumers, YouTube for creators, and YouTube for advertisers.
True.
They all have different primary users with different use cases.
It should really specify that what kind of product area that you are talking about, then you can further talk about the problem that that product area is trying to solve, right?
Yeah. You can also look at a company's mission statement and vision statement as well. There's a slight nuance difference. They're related though, but like a mission is what they want to achieve, like what is the end state. And it kind of takes like an opinionated stance on like how to tackle a problem, right? You have to have an opinion within a mission statement. A vision statement is more just like this is the desired end state of the company if we're completely successful in what we do. Both of those will give you a lot of hints what the core problem is. There's really no wrong answer for this. Without knowing like full context, you can't get anywhere close to a real answer. So this is really just seeing like your deductive reasoning, I think.
How to transfer from agency to the client side, like what are the skills are needed and how to prepare, any tips and steps?
I can't tell you about Facebook specifically, so I can only broadly tell you about FAANG in general. Agency work, it's very heavy on the execution, so your interaction and visual design skills are probably going to be pretty good. Generally, an agency have close to zero exposure to product thinking because a client defines all of it. I would focus almost entirely on product thinking, communication, storytelling, if you haven't done client presentations, and then also understanding metrics, because you don't really get to do metrics in agency as well. It's usually like conceptual work, right? Yeah, you have like one presentation, one shot, and then they maybe use like part of it, you know?
Yeah. And the fourth question is, what are the skill set that you think I missed, obviously, that I should better prepare before joining a big corporation, specific for me?
Product thinking and communication and metrics, same things. With communication, language difficulties aside, like I think your English is actually quite good. I think you need to, when people ask you a question, it's okay to take a second to think about their question and process. Sometimes I feel like you answer my question based off what you heard in the first half, and you don't really structure your answer out properly. So I think it's okay for you to spend like a section, like, hey, like, give me a second, let me think about it, and then give a better answer. Like usually when people ask questions, so like they don't ask them in the right way. They ask multiple questions in one question. So you need to kind of break that out and make sure you address all of them. Number 5, this is not specific to Facebook. This is just general. For a general FAANG company, why do you want ownership, right? Like ownership helps give you impact as a designer, but it's not the only way to get impact. Right now, the way you phrase this question, you're kind of like operating in the assumption that the only way to make an impact is through visual design, which is not true. Now, obviously, if you create a new design component that makes sense to the design system that other designers use, that's impact. But you can also make impact if you get alignment with a lot of different teams, if you pitch a product vision that gets adopted and the roadmap gets influenced, if you figure out a really complex interaction pattern, if you help the team organize and execute efficiently, if you gather context, save the team time, those are all different ways to make impact. Some people are better at making impact in certain like dimensions, it doesn't have to be visual.
This is like level 4 and level 5 and principles. Like how do you define each of them? And how do you approach regarding to promotion? Like you are definitely working with people who are at level 4, and you definitely can tell that what he or she is missing in regards to get promotion to the level 5.
So as I mentioned before, the relative weighting, like each skill changes per level, because as you get more senior, you focus more on product and team and less on execution, less on visual and interaction. It's also the scope of the problem. When you're at level 4, you're working on a feature. Level 5, you're working on a product. If you're principal, you're working on a product space or an entire department, right? It's just a bigger and bigger scope. Usually like the storytelling and the communication at every level is very different too. That's how you can tell. Like junior designers can't really explain why they designed something, or they can't answer questions, or maybe they're not confident in their execution. Whereas like senior designers, like they can tell a story that, you know, gets other people in the room excited and supportive of their vision. Because if you think about like a product, right, at a big company, like what do you think is the most time consuming? It's definitely not design. Sometimes it's not even engineering. It's getting a lot of different smart people with a lot of different opinions to agree on something. That's actually the hardest part, and it takes the longest.
Yeah.
And really good designers can be like, here's a vision. I think we should all do it. And then if everyone agrees in that one meeting, you save a week. Whereas the world's fastest designer versus the world's slowest designer, they wouldn't shave off a week. This is at big companies though. It's completely different at startups, by the way.
But like, what's the difference?
Well, it depends on what size of startup, but usually like the longer you've been at a startup, the higher your title. You're gonna be pretty balanced as well. It's going to be a bigger focus on team hiring, culture, and product thinking, but the emphasis isn't as drastic. Even at very senior levels at startup, you're still doing a lot of execution work, whereas at bigger companies, you're doing almost zero execution work.
How do you regain or gain trust at the workplace, especially when you F up something? How do you change impression from others upon you? Almost 5 years working at this agency. 1 or 2 of my people above me, they still think that I'm like a 4 or 5 years ago. Right now, I've definitely learned a lot and I improved, but I just found out that it's difficult for me to change their impressions or to gain trust from them. So how do you do that?
That's a great question. Think of trust as like a gauge, right? Like 0 to 100%. When you get hired into a company, just by virtue of passing their interview bar, you're going to have some base level of trust, let's say like 40% in that bar. Interactions that you have with people, the perceived success of your project will increase or decrease that bar. It's a lot easier to increase trust than to regain trust after it's been lost. And it's a lot easier to gain trust at the beginning than it is once you've been at the company for multiple years, because it's hard to change people's perception of you once it's been cemented. A lot of the cases, if you somehow lost a lot of trust, it's better to actually just leave companies.
But people make mistakes though.
When you make a mistake, right? Like it's more about like mitigating the loss in trust than to figure out how to regain trust after. So for example, if you make a mistake and you don't tell anyone, somebody finds out, you lose a lot of trust. If you make a mistake, you find out, you own it, you talk about why it happened, and you talk about your learnings and how to prevent yourself and other people from making the same mistake in the future, you don't really lose as much trust, and you might even gain trust, because nobody's perfect. You always make mistakes, especially in design. It's about how you handle those mistakes that influence your trust level at different gauges. I can elaborate too. Okay, so let's say you're a design lead for a team, and then you really advocate for a new feature that you think is going to help. And then you ship it, and the feature has like a negative impact on your metric, and it's a disaster.
Right?
If you don't do anything, if you say nothing, or you try and blame someone else, you lose a lot of trust, right?
True.
If you want to mitigate the loss in trust, or even gain trust, you own the mistake. You be like, hey, you know, I proposed this, and this is the results. This is what happened. This is why I think it happened. And this is how I and other members of the team can avoid making the same mistake in the future. This is my learnings from it, and this is my proposed plan to reverse this negative impact on the product. Just being really responsible for it, you know?
For you, what is a good product designer like?
Good product designers, it's contextual to the situation. Like if you threw me into like an AR team, I would be the worst designer there because I've never worked with AR. Or if you threw me into an agency, I'd be a really bad designer too, because most of my skills right now are in product thinking. So it depends on the context, right? Generally, though, designers, they work fast, they iterate, they're not too stuck on their own ideas, and they can take feedback really well. They can explain their design decisions, good communication, good storytelling. They can connect design goals to business goals. They can, rally the team around their ideas. They can explain their rationale. I think a lot of it actually is in the communication. Like if I, as a non-designer working with you, know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and I believe in you, and I think it's, a good call, I perceive you as a good designer.
Sorry, I'm planning to start applying for gigs. So based on all these companies, what level should I apply?
Are these all your top companies, or is it just like all your companies in general that you want to apply to?
These are like all the top companies I will apply.
Here's my suggestion. Create like a table with like 3 columns. First column should be your dream companies, like your moonshots. So like these companies here. Second column should be companies that you think you have like a reasonable chance at getting into. And then third column is like companies that you're very, very confident, like 100% confident can easily get a job there. If you think you're gonna take, I don't know, like 4 months to apply, like take chunks from each column and divide it by the number of cycles you're gonna apply for, and be just very cognizant of the ratio. For example, for me, I usually do every 2 weeks, I'll apply to 1 backup, 2 companies I'm confident for, and then 2 moonshot companies. You want to do it this way and kind of stagger it, because if you apply to all your top companies immediately and you don't get them, you can't reapply to them for the next year, 1. And then 2, as you're interviewing, you're making improvements to your portfolio and getting better at interviewing. If you apply to all these companies first and then you bomb those interviews, then you don't get that practice and that improved kind of interview skill set for any of the other companies afterwards if you've already exhausted all your top options. That's my advice. And then when you make those columns, it could be by position and company, not just company. A couple of them that only have senior positions, you put them in the moonshot column, and a couple of them that only have intermediate positions, you put them in the middle column. Anything that isn't FAANG, you should go for senior. Anything that is FAANG, you should probably go for intermediate. A lot of those companies won't even tell you the level for most of the time. Like they'll just say like designer, and then based off the interview, they'll kind of put you in the right level. Sure, let's do app critique. Take a look at the screenshots and tell me who the app is for and what problem does it solve. Like try and put yourself in the shoes of the end user and be like, why is this useful to me? If you're the CEO of this app and then you're making a lot of changes, what kind of metrics would you track? Are there integrations you can do with? Easiest way to learn about metrics is to start. I can think of 20 ideas pretty easily for this one.
Dang, stop it right here. That's a skill set that I want to build up. I probably can only think of 1 or 2 max.